gosh. I always liked to write. Even as a kid, I like to write. I like to tell stories, like to draw stories. And um, I tried a bunch of different things. I maybe should have gone into science, but I also maybe should have gone into art. And I was always interested in too many things. I couldn't dual major. I couldn't do that at my college. And I wound up going through 5 different majors. There was no writing major then. There was an English major. I had applied to the journalism school. I had gone as far as saying, I want to be a writer, apply to the journalism school. And when I got to school and registered, they told me there was a mistake and that my application had gone into arts and sciences, not the journalism school, which was separate. And I said, what do I do? And they said, go home and reapply. Well, I had already moved into my dorm, everything, made friends. It was 5 days into the semester, and I said, I will be an English major. And then I was a psych major, and then I was a library science major, nursing major. And then finally I settled on education because at that time, all 3 of my roommates were ed majors, and they said, you'll be able to get out on time, and it's fun. Because I wasn't going to be able to graduate at that point if I didn't select a major. So I went to education school and to be a teacher. And by the time I left, I knew I didn't want to be a teacher, but I didn't know what I was going to do. I just was going to get out of college. And I met a person who had a job at Scholastic, and he was talking to me about this job. It involved writing news for kids in grade 6. And we were at a party. I talked to him for a very long time. I think at some point he realized that I wasn't interested in him. I was interested in his job. And he actually said, I'm leaving Monday and I can get you an interview with my boss. And so he did. And I went in, and there have been 2 times in my life when I've walked into a work situation where I felt like I was completely where I should be. And this was the first time, and it was a publishing house. And I was just like, I loved everything that everybody had on their walls. I loved the conversations I was overhearing. I liked the look of the people. It was very diverse. It was there was a lot of talking going on. It just seemed like a rich environment. So I worked very hard to get that job, and I did get it in part on the strength of having been recently in education school and been in classrooms a lot. And I learned to write on that job. I had always liked to write, but I hadn't learned much about it. An English major reads a lot, you know, and that wasn't as interesting to me. I love to read, but I didn't want to write about everything that I read about. But so I learned to write at Scholastic, and kept on going from there. I was doing little short articles for everything. And at some point, I started wanting to write more than 500 words about a topic. So I began writing books. And the rest, as they say, is history. It's exactly the same problem. I love both science and art. And I would have gone back and forth between them if I had been able to. I wish that I wish I had a PhD. I wish that I had had formal illustration training, formal art training. And I didn't have either of those things, but I have learned a great deal on my own, and that has been through my writing. So I'm glad, I'm happy. I really am interested in the creative process. I'm interested in what people think about when they do science and how it's different and how it's the same as what they think about when they do art. And it's taken me a while to figure out that there's a lot of similarities, lots of crossovers, but that they choose different emphases. And I think I would wind up writing about neurodifferences, which is still science, right? But it's also art, and how do people come up with ideas? How do they deal with their own psychology that could get in the way of their ideas? You know what I mean? Things like writer's block, things like imposter syndrome, all of these things that all of us wrestle with, whether we are scientists or business people or artists, but how does that translate into those 2 different forms? I don't think I knew that about myself. Thank you for asking that question. So working for Scholastic News, which is that magazine that used to get on the desk in your classroom that, you know, I told you all the current events and had little features on all sorts of things. And we had to talk to everybody. First day on the job, I had to call NASA and I had to call the White House, and I was terrified. But everyone around me was doing it too, and they're like, no, you just have to do this, and you just get used to it, calling people. We interviewed sports stars and movie stars and people in every line of business and, you know, every line of work. And it didn't take me long to figure out that the people I looked forward to talking to the most were the scientists. They had interesting lives. They were going to Antarctica and they were going in submarines to the bottom of the ocean, and they were getting on ships and going out to sea, and nobody, you know, and their lab would say, oh, you know, you can write him a letter, but he won't get it till he's back from sea. And I was like, whoa, you know, he's stepped out of the universe. And they were also really enthusiastic about what they were doing. They're very excited. And if you said to them, you know, if they started talking science talk to you and you were overwhelmed, you could always say, okay, I'm going to have to turn around and write this for sixth graders. Let me rephrase what you just told me and you tell me if I've got it right or wrong. And I just love talking to them, and I wanted to talk to them more. And that's really been the driving force, was trying to figure out, who are these people? What is it to be a scientist? I was writing a book and happened to talk to a scientist for it, who had been developing, he was working with Alvin, the submarine, and he was trying to do some outreach in the state of Delaware to the public schools. And so he had written a curriculum thinking it was just going to be this one-time thing, that he would have interaction with these classrooms. And then he started getting all these requests from other states. And he had to really write a curriculum that wasn't just for Delaware and wasn't just for high school, but middle school. And so he hired me to do those things for him, and also to write a whole bunch of stuff for his website. And again, it's all educational writing. It was what I was doing all the time. But one of the things I had to do was interview, before they all went to sea, everyone who was going to be on the ship, and write a little piece about it for the website. And the last person that I interviewed was the person who was going aboard as the science communicator. It was a grad student. And she said, I'm not going. And I said, yeah, he's got you on the list. You're the science communication person. And she said, I can't go. And doesn't he know that? And it's like, I guess he didn't get the message, you know? So I called him up and I said, okay, it's 10 days before you go to sea. This person can't come with you. If you can't find anybody else, I could go. And I got to go. And that was just, I loved it so much. And at one point, he looked at me, you know, we're out at sea, people are seasick, but it was some gorgeous nights of sunset. Everyone was on deck. Somebody was playing a guitar. Everyone's watching the sunset. And he looked at me and he said, you really love this, don't you? And I said, doesn't everybody love this? Look, everybody, you know, everybody's having a wonderful time here. But the answer was no, not everybody really does love it. It's a very pressured situation for scientists. And for me, it was just pure joy, and it still is. So I go every chance I get. You research until you find stories that you really want to share. They are broad topics, right? I mean, sharks is just like this huge, huge body of information. Um, but one thing you're trying to do is really vary what you're doing and give a good overview of the whole situation. And so if you research enough to feel like I don't know, you go out one door and you keep on researching until you start seeing yourself coming the other way, almost like, okay, I'm repeating now. Now I've already know all this stuff. And that's the first thing, is to be sure that you have a grasp of the whole topic, and then to go deeper, pick the rabbit holes that you're going to go down. Okay, I want to talk about the Greenland shark because it's the oldest shark in the world, or, you know, or whatever it is. Or I want to talk about this ridiculous thing where, you know, like Russia or China, I can't even remember now who it was, just decided to start blowing up satellites in space, which sent shards of stuff going everywhere and was a huge danger for everyone, and just made the space junk problem so much worse. They should have just left their big thing going around. But that was like, okay, that's one way that people have tried to get rid of this stuff. So that was fun. I keep going till I find a story that I'm interested in. Research is not boring to me if I am looking for something, and what I'm looking for is something juicy to come back and tell people. So books, I would say 6 to 12 months, depending. And a lot of it is coming up with the structure of the book and figuring out what you want to do. You know, okay, these are the main topics that I'm going to cover. And then, drafting and having them come back and say, okay, we don't really want this whole thing over here. So there is some, it's iterative in that an editor will say, no, go this direction, go this way, or we want more about that. And then you have to go through copy editing and fact checking, which can be really fun conversations where people are reviewing your stuff. The fact checker will come back and say, I can't find how fast a mako shark goes. I can't find any ones, everybody has a different number, and I can explain, well, here's why they have that number. Sometimes they're speeding, sometimes it's an average, sometimes it's, they're hunting, whatever they're doing. And so just kind of and sometimes I won't know, I'll have to go off and find something. And I like that process too. I like looking for stuff, and that's key. Comic strips is a very different situation. The books tend to be more like what I just described to Ciara. You come up with an idea of something that you think people would be interested in, or something I'm interested in finding out. And in all cases, I think people have the assumption that you're going to write about something that it's something that you're knowledgeable about. So let me go and write about dogs, or like whatever. I don't think that that's an interesting way to start a book. I start by, what do I want to know? What am I curious about? And what are those carpenter bees doing in my roof? Well, wherever the question comes from, and if I don't think that would be a terrible idea for a book, but it's not fantastic, and then you say, well, are other people interested in that? And the answer is probably not with carpenter bees, or they already know. Anyway, forget the carpenter bees. So you start with something that you want to know, and go ahead with that. The comics are a little bit more tricky because it's, all of it is translating. There's a big world of information out there, and I am your curator. I'm going through and finding the stuff that I think you will think is cool and linking it together. But when there's a comic involved, there's a visual element as well, where I have to say, what's the most important thing for you to see about this? How do the words link up with it? How do the words and the drawings talk back and forth to each other, and how do they reach out to the audience as well? I don't know how to describe what happens. It just kind of gels in my head. Sometimes the picture comes first, sometimes the words come first. Trying to just kind of come up with one little gem that is a little, what's that word for the little hors d'oeuvre you get? An amuse-bouche of curious, something that's going to make you go, oh, that's interesting, or feel right at home, or feel like, okay, I'm in the right place with this cook. No, I had no idea that has come as a very strange, switch over. I had a couple bad years, as you do. I had 2 books that were really taking a lot of my time, and one of them got delayed a year, which is a blow, because then everything that you're doing involving it, the promotion, everything else. And then I also, it was a timely book, and I had to go back and write a bunch of more stuff so that it would make sense. And then I had another book that I had worked on at the same time that got canceled because an editor moved to a different house. And so the bottom dropped out. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to just go and do all the other jobs that I ever thought I might like to do. I'll go be an editor. I'll go work at the Maritime Aquarium. I'll go, do all these different things. And while I was doing that stuff, golly, my brain just keeps on. While I was doing that stuff, um, I got sad. And my daughter, who had just started college, called up one day and found me in tears and said, well, when I get sad, I make a collage. You should just go make something. Stop trying so hard. It had become like every time I wrote a word or drew a picture, it would always be like, well, is this going to sell? Is this going to be a book that'll be okay? What'll happen? And even though I knew that the two things that had happened with my books weren't my fault, I just really felt fragile. And she called the next day and said, okay, today just draw a picture. And I was like, all right. And then the third day, she's like, just make anything that you feel like making. And I started doing a book just in a sketch pad that was drawing and writing at the same time. And it turned into being about a girl who doodles in school and gets in trouble and is moving to a new town and decides that she's going to keep on doodling, but that she's going to find a way to advocate for herself with her new teachers and be allowed to doodle because she's convinced that it helps her. And so she draws the whole book. And I did it in a month. I started doing like 3 or 4 pages a day, and it sold. It sold for more than I'd ever made for a conventional book. And it didn't do hugely well, but it got me thinking about doing something more with art, in part because it was about a kid with ADHD, and that's why she doodles, which was me. And in part because it was a visual story. So different readers were picking it up. I mean, I would go to a book fair and sit there with all my books on my table, and kids would come up and, and take that book and like put it against their chest like this. And I was just like, what is going on with this? There's something different happening with this comic thing. And so I started trying it with science, and it had a similar effect, where it welcomes people in. As soon as you see the picture, it's about whales, or it's about a chemistry lab, or without even knowing anything, you're already in the room. And so then it's just a question of going on and reading whatever the people are saying about it. It becomes more welcoming to people. And that's been a really interesting thing to find out about and to experiment with. Actually been 3 different science comic series. I started doing them for print. There's a science magazine that's part of the Cricket family, if you know Cricket. Do you remember Cricket? There's a magazine called Muse, and there's another called Odyssey, and they are the science magazines for slightly older kids, not as old as you're writing for, but maybe middle schoolers, upper elementary. And for 4 years, I did spreads, like 2-page comics for them that were about science. They were called Humanimal Doodles, and they were all science of animals, but it was about how people interact with animals. So that went on for 4 years, 10 months a year. And then when I was invited by a scientist to apply to go to Antarctica with him, and I decided I would do another kind of science comic that was social media ready. So Instagram 6x6 squares, and that's Antarctic log. So that's been going on. It's almost 6 years now, and I do it once a week. So I was a kid started because I was in the field with scientists, and they were talking about, you work with kids a lot, you're writing for kids a lot. What's going on? Why aren't more kids going into science? And particularly, why aren't more minority kids going into science? And why are we losing women after graduate school? And, and what do you think is going on? And so I started thinking about it with some of these scientists and came up with I Was a Kid, in order to find people who are from minority groups that are already working in these fields, talk to them about some of what they've gone through to get where they are, and just kind of provide mirrors for a lot of kids from different groups and pathways that are kind of, here's how this person dealt with this, with the problem of whatever. And to just say it's really not a smooth path for anybody. We all have the impression that scientists are brilliant and, and that they probably went straight from being a valedictorian of their high school to a 4-year college and then a PhD, and, and they had enough money and privilege for all of it. When, the actual truth is that most people don't do that. Most people have a really crooked path, and that showing that was important to making people feel welcome and like they really could do what they were interested in doing. So it's in its early days. It's in its second year, and the idea is to be able to provide it for free to middle school and high school students and their teachers and parents. So you can go on the website, iwasakid.com, and download it for free. And if you want prints, you can print them out, or you can order them from me and I will send them at cost. And I am just trying to build the library of profiles. There are about 30 now, and I've got about 10 or 15 more that are underway, and find people that, just broadening the representation all the time, across STEAM, science, tech, engineering, arts, and math, and medicine, across socioeconomic, racial. Oh, well, diversifying is a lot of it. I see some people come into the field and write their first novel and win a Newbery and win all the prizes, and then get a little bit pigeonholed. They've written a story about, like it's an adapted fairy tale, and it does really well, and then they're expected to do everything else is expected to have magic in it, or to have princesses, or to have, whatever. And I haven't had that problem, because I haven't really done any one thing that everybody loved to death, which has its minuses for certain. But it really has its pluses in that I've gone around and done a lot of things. If I had succeeded with my first books and gotten all the prizes and gotten all the money, I never would have gotten into science. I never would have gotten into art or comics. And I really would have missed some of the real huge joys of my life. But that said, it is hard to not sell. It is hard to be poorly reviewed. It is hard to be rejected. And there did come a point where as I said before, I decided I was just going to try and do something else. And I went off and did my maritime aquarium year. And then at the end of the school year, when there weren't any more, more kids there so much, I became an editor, and I did some other things. And I had lunch hours that at first I would like go for a walk, and I was like, look at this is great. I'm in an office, I'm getting paid, even if I'm just sitting here doing nothing, I'm still getting paid, and I get a lunch hour. This is incredible. But after a little while, I started having ideas while I was working on other things, and I would stay in at lunch and write some things down, and then go to lunch late, or just not take a walk, go out in the backyard or something. And at some point, it reached critical mass, the stuff that I was writing, and I submitted it, and it got accepted. And so I was like, all right, I guess I'm writing again, you know? So I think at that point I accepted for myself that this is what I need to do, and I'm not going to try to do other things. And it wasn't like I was having any resounding, thrilling moments with the other jobs. What I do is write. I tell stories. That's what I do. So I had to accept that from myself, for better or worse. have to confront okay, so I mean, I just talked about accepting that this is what you want to do, and then you have to be willing to learn. It's what at the beginning, they told me it's a long apprenticeship into children's books. It's gonna take you a long time to figure out all the different pieces that you need to master and then have them all come together. It's not true of everybody, but it's really true of most people, and if you start off with that idea that it's gonna take you a while, don't quit your day job, keep on doing all the other things. You may be pleasantly surprised and have, something fall in your lap, but knowing that it's going to take a while, and then knowing that you're going to have ups and downs in response to that, that you're not going to, every day is not going to be wonderful. Every day you're not going to be very productive. You may write 600 words one day and cut 500 of them the next day. And that's just the process. So figuring out what your process is and figuring out what it is emotionally too are key. And then really being compassionate towards yourself and kind and figuring out what you need in order to keep on going. I won't even say to succeed, just to continue, get to the end of it, and then find other like-minded people. That really helps.